A storm assaults Catador. While rain falls harmlessly upon Minister Ilahn's estate, purple lightning cuts through the sky. This weather is reflected inside the estate. Ilahn and the Muse of Gitan ascend a set of stairs. Although I would like to point out that the Muse just appears to float up them. She is not drawn with feet. Ilahn wants to know more about this man she's brought to him, Rustain. Does he have the same sigil that Ilahn does? Is that where his power comes from? The Muse says,
No. He has something similar, but not complete. He is here to be both spur and lure.
Ilahn is annoyed by the Muse's continued air of mystery. Include me in your plans, Muse, and I will aid you in them. But confound me, and I will make you an agent of mine.
The Muse is fascinated by Ilahn's spirit, unfettered by any care for others.
My only niece rejected me, Ilahn replies, so my line ends with me. It is only my actions that will be remembered, so I will be the first minister of all islands. Oh, okay. The two of them step onto the balcony of the tower that they've been ascending, where they find Reesha. She now floats in the air, the purple lightning flashing from her fingertips, dancing amongst the lightning rods scattered through Catador. Ilahn orders her to stop this display. She's frightening the populace. Reesha does, after another quick display. She plays this off as practice. After all, doesn't Ilahn want her to be useful to him? Ilahn turns to say something to the Muse about how he's got this all well in hand, but she's gone. So instead, he turns back to Reesha, who lands on the balcony before him. Reesha thought that he would be happy to finally have a true partner, someone of equal value. The old man stares. He has no peers, just lessers of many levels. Ro interrupts, offering Reesha a silver necklace. She can use this talisman to contact him, although it does also serve as a reminder to whom she owes her power. The talisman at the end of the chain is the red half of the CrossGen sigil. Ilahn uses this idea that she is beholden to Ro as a guest is to his host in order to weasel a visit out of Ro to his home of Elysia. Ro hesitates to agree to this, as well he should when dealing with Minister Ilahn of Catador, explaining that his home might not be as inviting as the minister imagines. Author Barbara Kessel then transitions us nicely back to Sephie's half of the story from one visitation to another. That's a real nice flooping transition, which unfortunately I'm going to have to interrupt the poop out of. So Reesha now has superpowers. She is able to fly, and she can generate lightning, or maybe control it. Unfortunately, this does mean that Reesha is the latest black character in a comic book to get electricity powers. I don't know why that's a thing, but it's a thing, and honestly, I'm surprised to see it crop up in a cross-gen comic book, which typically have tried to do non-standard comic book things. To be fair, this specific superpower does give Reesha a signature that doesn't feel very unnatural to the world of Meridian, and it is visually striking from both Ilahn and Sephie. Ilahn's power of destruction has generally manifested as red light and or smoke, maybe explosions when he was in Acacia, and then visually the objects that he's destroying mostly tend to disintegrate. They turn to ash, they break down, it's a little hard to read. Sephie's gifts glow yellow, regardless of whether or not that's a healing wave passing across wood or a slight force field to juggle logs in midair. Reesha's lightning is a brilliant purple color here, perhaps the usual color of lightning in a comic, blue, combined with the red energy signature of Rustain. This power and signature now make her a more standalone, more individualized character when compared to series regulars like Ilahn and Sephie. We also have Ilahn doing just a lot of what he does best here, and I love him for it. He does pointlessly question the Muse some more, and she continues to avoid giving him a straight answer. And I don't know if he doesn't get the Muse's general vibe by now, or if he just doesn't care what that vibe is, but I do have to admit that this part annoyed me a little bit. Given that Ilahn once questioned the Muse through an entire night, and she told him nothing about his sigil, this line of questioning feels pretty pointless. And maybe Ilahn is sick of it, because really, for him to say, yo, dude, I will team up with you if you tell me what I'm teaming up for, but if you're just going to keep playing games, then I'm going to mess you up. Maybe he's finally getting just a little bit sick of the Muse. Given how little Ilahn knows or understands about the Muse, I do find that aspect of his threat kind of hard to believe, but I do appreciate him finally getting tired of her games. Especially when the Muse is the only one in this book who seems to know about the sigil, and she can come and go as she pleases, and, she brings strange men with superpowers to hang out with Ilahn randomly, because why not? I mean, if you want to mess with her, Ilahn, then good luck to you, sir. I think you're going to need it. This actually ties into the second thing that I really like about this scene. When Reesha stops practicing and says that she is a true peer of Ilahn now, he still isn't down with that. We saw this aspect of Ilahn's personality when he visited Acacia, and Minister Mariah thought that she and Ilahn were partners. Oh, it's the least we could do because we're trading partners. No, my dear. To Ilahn, there are no partners, as he says here, just lessers of varying rank. And for Ilahn, that even includes powerful, mysterious beings like Ro-Rustain, the newly empowered Reesha, and also the mysterious Muse. Maybe Ilahn finally demanding that the Muse just team up with him outright stems from, a secret place that maybe he does respect her power. Where Ro is something to be investigated and Reesha is someone to be used, the Muse is someone that he needs to work with, or he's going to find a way to work her. Which probably isn't good for her, assuming his powers can even do anything at all, which I would be surprised if they could. Then finally, we have Ilahn preying on Ro's guise as a businessman, which this, to me, is so smart for the character. Ilahn first confirms that Ro views himself as an honest businessman, establishing that Reesha owes him for his hospitality in giving her his powers. Then Ilahn pitches his idea that Ro owes Ilahn for giving him a place to sleep for the night and for feeding him and for giving him drinks. Ro can't back out of it now. He's got to be part of the good deal. So when Ilahn pitches a visit to Elysia, Ro can't really say no. He can say that it's a bad idea, that Ilahn doesn't know what that actually means, but he can't say no. Because then he looks like an ungrateful guest. He looks like a welcher. He looks dishonorable. He can't possibly do that and still maintain face and maintain a position of superiority in this small group. Ilahn of Catador is a master of weasel words. We also have him finally stating a clear-cut goal. We've seen Ilahn do a lot of stuff, presumably in the name of acquiring more wealth and power, but we've never known what he wanted to do with the end result of all of that. Now we know. He wants to rule all the islands of Demetria. Just, little dream. This motivation stems partially from the loss of Sephie, the only family that he had left at that point, as he says. In order to secure his place in history now, he won't be survived by a person. He's got to take over the world. But it is also a little bit inspired by Ro-Rustain's visit to begin with. Ro says that he comes from a place called Elysia, and says that it is not on Demetria. And Ilahn knows Demetria pretty well. He's had his eye on it. But if Elysia is not on Demetria, then what does that mean? It means it's somewhere else entirely. That means Ilahn is looking at himself as a big fish in a small pond now. Why rule a single island? Why rule any amount of islands when you can rule an entire planet? This particular scene was really, at its core, all about Ilahn making connections with, from his perspective here, hopefully new tools. Not allies. Remember, they are not equals or peers. These are tools to be used in his conquest. Kessel established that he is building these bridges, literally trying to connect with a new world, while down on the surface of Demetria, Sephie is also doing the same. Sephie and her new logger allies, Kotsin, Danian, and Hondel, cross a bridge over the sea heading into a rocky shoreline. Sephie, however, lingers behind them because she is amazed by the beauty of the ocean. The others tease her about it, but in a very good-natured way. I think that they are almost as amazed as she is by her being amazed. It's kind of like getting to see the ocean for the first time, for the second time for these three. And keep in mind that Sephie has never experienced something like the ocean before, since she grew up on Meridian. The constant impact of the waves on the shore, the sea spray splashing on your face, the sun on the surface of the water shifting with every wave. Sephie has never seen anything like this, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. She is literally just taking all of this in. Hondel has to literally pull her away from the railing, but they do finally move on. They move up the shore and into a rockier landscape. Then they move up the rocks, working their way into a cavern. On their way inside of it, Kotzen explains what it's going to be like here. He knows a gal who knows everybody and everything about the caverns, but Sephie is going to have to prove herself in order to win her trust. Mining is very dangerous work, so the people only put their faith in strength here. They don't normally trust weak folk from the sky, Sephie, he says. They won't join you unless they respect you, and they won't respect you unless they can fear you. At least a little bit. So you're going to have to show them that you can handle them if it comes to that. As the group walks and talks, we move further underground. The group passes by miners dressed in simple clothes. They wield pickaxes in well-lit, well-organized tunnels. A minecart is centered between them all, piled high with rock. But the sounds begin to shift the further they go in. The sound of steel on rock gives way to grunts of pain. The sound of bodies hitting one another. The occasional expletive. Our traveling party enters a large, hollowed-out chamber. We can see building stacked upon building in the background. A whole city hidden underground. But it's the foreground that shocks Sephie. A veritable riot is going on. I'm talking man versus man, woman versus woman, woman versus man. Limp bodies smash into apple crates. There doesn't appear to be any leader or direction or like a particular reason for this fight. It just is. The loggers surround Sephie like bodyguards, and they start to throw off or push back or punch anyone who gets too close to her. It's pretty easy for them. They are clearly practiced at handling their own in these kinds of situations. Kotzen even gets a shallow cut on his arm at one point, and he's not really bothered by it, but Sephie steps in close. "Let me try something," she says. She puts her hands near the cut, and she uses her sigil to heal his arm. "Hey, I didn't know you could do that," he says. "Yeah, neither did I," Sephie replies. "It just seemed possible." A woman's voice suddenly shouts out from nearby. "Kotzen, you pinhead! What are you doing bringing a kid here?" Kotzen smiles as he shoves away yet another fighter. "We're just showing Sephie the quiet streets of the cavern. Sephie, meet Darren Beck." Standing on a raised stone platform, men unconscious at her feet, is Darren Beck. Darren has long red hair down to her butt and piercing blue eyes. She is thin and athletic, displaying a well-toned body. Black leather pants are held in place by a ridiculously wide belt. She has on a midriff and cleavage-showing top with rolled-up sleeves. Underneath of it is some kind of black undershirt, but it only covers her arms. The shirts, boots, and gloves that she wears are all a blue-gray color. In one hand, she has a fighting stick, topped with a small bit of metal. "Pleased to meet you," Darren says. "Stick with me, I'll keep you safe." Sephie looks around at all the violence. "You will keep me safe? From this?" Which is right when the ceiling above them suddenly gives out. Two men wrestling with a knife fall from above, along with a bunch of debris like rocks and wooden columns. Darren tackles Sephie out of the way, but Sephie has kept an arm outstretched through this. She put up a force field, not just to protect herself, but also to catch the falling dudes. Despite how serious this incident could have been, everything is fine. No one is hurt. Sephie looks at Darren. "I really can take care of myself." My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 32.10 of Meridian, Making Impressions. Darren Beck. There's a character with a story to her name. First, Sephie's journey here perfectly mirrors the opening scene with Ilahn. His eyes and attention are on the stars as he works his way towards Elysia. Sephie, on the other hand, returns down below to Demetria and instead seeks to prove herself to its peoples. She is an outsider here, but she's going to do what she can to bridge that gap. Sephie sees herself as, at best, an equal of these people. If they choose to follow her, then hey, that's great, but they choose to do so because they choose to do so. While Ilahn would force all to work for him and for his benefit. Their journeys, so far in Meridian, reflect who they are as people, and I floop and love it! Going into the Caverns, I honestly love how easily the loggers fall into defending Sephie like that's their job from the fight. It is obvious that they are as comfortable here as they are in the woods, which not only hints that these two groups of people are probably more closely entwined than they appear, but it also shows us how much societal difference there has been between the land folks and the islanders like Sephie. Going from Meridian or Catador down to Acacia, the logging camp, or the Caverns is like going to another world for Sephie. But for a person who lives in one of those three cities, they aren't really all that different, other than probably some legal issues with Acacia enslaving children. Again, this is really clever world building, and the ongoing fight scene while Kotzen and Sephie talk means that all of this exposition is never delivered to us as just dry dialogue with nothing going on. Kessel gives us this fight scene not only to establish the rough and tumble nature of the Caverns and the challenge that Sephie is walking into, but it also gives us visually something to look at while the rest of these characters are talking. We also get to see Sephie heal Kotzen. I suppose given the situation, that's not an inappropriate name for him. We also see Sephie heal Kotzen's cut arm, which is a first-time use of her sigil in that way in this series. So that's interesting. And then we meet Darren. Now, as far back as this book originally coming out 20 years ago, Darren Beck stood out amongst the cast to me. She is clearly designed to be this book's hot chick, and that's with a capital H and a capital C. And that is something that's just never been a part of Meridian up to this point. While main female characters like Sephie, Mariah, and Reesha are certainly drawn like conventionally beautiful women, they generally aren't displayed in the comic as sexy ladies. And I say that, knowing that Sephie did flash us back in issue 1, and then had a slightly steamy dream about Jad at the beginning of issue 7, but neither of those moments were gratuitous. They were never meant to draw the interest and attention of a horny male audience member. In almost all of these female characters' appearances, Meridian has treated them with respect, focusing on the story and art on their motivations, goals, and role in the story. They aren't just props to be beaten off to like some comic book characters seem to be created to be. This was part of author Barbara Kessel's intention in the way she created Meridian. She set out to create a book that would appeal to all readers of all ages by telling a great story featuring interesting characters set to fantastic art. Your lead character doesn't need G-cup-sized boobs and a bikini costume in order to make a great comic. Even if you certainly can sell a comic starring that type of character. Meridian was meant to be something different from that trend, and reading the letters pages at the back of Meridian, it certainly connected with its audience in this way. There are a lot of readers who specifically thank the creative team for not stooping to sexualizing a teenager in order to tell this story. Unfortunately, Kessel's boss did not have the same creative nobility, let's say. One of the interesting things about CrossGen's model of creation is that there were no editors of the various titles. Mark Alessi hired writers, and for the most part, he trusted them to do their jobs. They would routinely have get-togethers where they went over scripts and upcoming story ideas and gave each other feedback, but nobody was responsible for anybody's book except that person. And most people who work in the comic industry love comic books. They want to make great comic books. It's why they're there. So you don't really need an editor when you just hand them the keys to the kingdom and go, make the best book you can. Don't screw it up. Giving them that amount of free reign, they're going to try to be the best that they can be, which is why I think that CrossGen's titles are generally so good across the board. But unfortunately, as the main boss for the company, who has a hand in pretty much every stage of production if he wants it, Alessi could also demand whatever he wanted from the creative teams, and their jobs were on the line if they told him no to a certain degree. For example, the whole reason that Arwen had a dog in Sojourn at all was because Mark Alessi told author Ron Mars to put one in, quote, because people like dogs, end quote. And I would argue he's right. Krieg is a great addition to Sojourn, and it really gives Arwen someone to emotionally connect with in a way that she connects with almost no one else in the comic. Well, Darren Beck has a similar backstory here. According to a recent Facebook post that she made, Barbara Kesel had outlined the story of Meridian and given that to penciler Steve McNiven. She was paying his desk a visit one day when she saw him penciling a page from issue 12, the page introducing Darren. Kesel had not created this character. She didn't ask for this character or expect this character to show up. Worse, Darren is the exact opposite kind of character of what Kesel had been trying to do with Meridian this entire time. When she asked McNiven what was going on here, he said that Mark Alessi wanted a sexy Lara Croft-style babe so that the book would sell to the one-handed readers club. Even her name, Darren Beck, is an allusion to the phrase there and back again. Quote, as in, finally made some progress doing a story that wasn't just boy eye candy and featured an actual girl behaving like a girl, only to be dragged back into the same GD sexist no swearing that was everywhere in comics in those years. End quote. Darren Beck feels like an odd fit for this book because she was created from outside of the book to almost be an example of the antithesis of this book. In Alessi's defense, allow me to play devil's advocate for a second, his main concern here was selling comics. And here's the thing, sexy ladies sell. His goal here was not to kill Meridian or sink the ship. His goal was not to compromise Kessel's artistic integrity as a writer. His goal was to sell more copies of Meridian, and he felt that a character like Darren Beck would help that. Kesel clearly didn't agree. I personally don't really think it's necessary, but we don't have sales numbers for these books. I would love to see what Meridian was selling like before Darren Beck showed up and then after Darren Beck showed up, because I would almost guess that there was probably no difference at all in an uptick of readers. And even Alessi's daughter, Ashley Alessi, remarked on Facebook that she remembered how utterly pissed off Kesel was at the time over this. Eventually, Kesel did figure out how to write the character, and even became quite pleased with the backstory that she created for her, which we'll get a little bit of here in this issue. I will freely admit, hand to God, that I do not mind when my comic ladies are also sexy ladies. But that doesn't mean that every comic book needs to be like that. Every female character doesn't need to be like that. And I will always admit that I don't think Meridian needed Darren Beck to be sexy. While Darren does come to occupy an important part of history in Meridian, and she does go on to become a mainstay of the cast, and I do think that she teaches some good lessons to Sephie that she wouldn't have gotten from another character that currently exists, her vibe is always going to stand out as slightly other. And right off the bat, meeting her here, I think that you feel it. Kesel does her best to make Darren more than just a sex object. She can handle herself in a fight, which we've just been told is super important to the culture of the Caverns. Kotzen has built her up as this very important figure, cementing Darren as a strong, powerful woman that others listen to. She watches Sephie carefully here, but she also protects her, demonstrating her ability and her bravery. Darren might have been originally created to be a sex object, but gosh darn it! Hello, I'm sorry to wake you up. Kessel would have Darren be so much more than that as the book would go on. So Darren just saved Sephie from that falling debris, and Sephie demonstrated her powers openly. She appears to be a little impressed by Sephie and asks how she does that. Sephie says that it started with a mark on her forehead, and it's a long story, and it's actually kind of why she's here. Kotzen helps Sephie stand, adding that she's here to spread word about what the Minister of Catador is up to. She's looking for allies in her fight, but that'll be hard with this fight going on. Sephie, you need to stop this, and you need to get their attention, he says. Sephie smiles and pulls off her backpack. She tosses it casually to Kotzen. Hold this. Then she lights up and flies into the air. Her narration recalls that this was the moment, surrounded by people fighting, a situation that would have horrified her just days before. That was the moment that something inside her changed. Her papa said that he had the authority of his ministership long before he had the title. Well, she had the title long before she had any of the authority. But now, she acted as the Minister of Meridian and demanded these people's time and attention and help. Sephie flies above the fighting crowd, and then she lights up. The blinding light forces the fight to stop, and all eyes end up being trained on her. Kotzen smiles at Darren. I'd like you to meet Sephie, the Minister of Meridian. Darren has heard that she had... Wait a minute. What's a Sky Island minister doing down here, she asks. Kotzen looks at Sephie. Well, I'd call it flying. Or maybe you could say it's her learning to show off. Sephie then makes an impassioned pitch to the miners. Allying with her means trading directly to the islands without Minister Ilahn's control. That could mean better wages for them, less dangerous work. Ilahn wants to make slaves of the world. You've all seen what I can do? Well, he can do worse. While she is doing this, a red-haired figure in a cloak sneaks up behind Darren. Whispering, he asks, Do you think she's the one? Darren hesitates a moment, but she says yes, she could be. The figure nods. Then we'll need to take her down. I'll arrange it, Darren says. Meet us behind my place. Well, that's certainly ominous. Thanks, Darren. We just had trust issues with the loggers. Way to go. While Sephie acted on Meridian's behalf, the people of Meridian were up to something else entirely. As we pick up their story, we can see the camp that they have set up since arriving on the new island. Tents are set up in neat rows. 2 large fire pits are roasting some form of meat. A trail of pink flower petals stretches from a pink tent off to a makeshift gazebo, I would say, off on the horizon. Inside of that pink tent, we find Phoebe and Zahuka. Zahuka warns her friend against rushing into this. But as 2 aides ready Phoebe's hair, she says that Jad promised to take care of her forever. She's going to make him prove it. You know, it sure looks like Phoebe and Jad are getting married. Wow, the people of Meridian fall in love fast. Zuka has Asago, she has Jad, Phoebe says. Yes, Sephie is dead, and that absolutely sucks, but she isn't going to be sad that she and Jad have been able to find each other in the wake of that loss. She turns to her friend and prompts her to say, at the same time, Sisters not of blood, but hearts. Ours is a bond no force can part. Phoebe then holds up a mirror, studying herself. Sephie would have wanted a happy ending for us all. She smiles. I'm ready. The flap to the tent is suddenly pulled open, and Mira, fully decked out in her wedding dress, says, Finally! I thought I was going to be late to my own wedding, girls! The girls say that it is their first wedding, and Phoebe wanted to look perfect for it. A little girl hands Mira her bouquet. For a moment, the young women are sad that the wedding isn't like those back on Meridian. For Mira, though, it's more important that they look forward, not back. They have a new start on a new island. It couldn't be more right. Meanwhile, Jad is helping his father, John, prepare over in a blue tent. They gently tease one another for a minute, but then the work is done. Jad says that, they could have waited to have the wedding, at least until the Great Hall is constructed. John argues otherwise. They all need a shared task to make this island their home. After the loss of Meridian and the pain of moving, it's important that they have a comforting ritual in an unfamiliar place to make them feel at home. And, he really wants to marry Mira. Underneath a floating cover of woven fibers, edged with flowers and ribbon, the two exchange vows in front of their friends and neighbors. They kiss. The Meridian Knights throw flowers into the air as the sun sets just behind the rim of their new home. It's honestly incredibly sweet. So, fun fact, 2 of the members of the CrossGen message boards met on that board, fell in love, and they ended up getting married. When they did, they used John and Mira's dialogue here as their vows. How sweet is that? I love all of the character that is on display here in this little scene. Phoebe's eager energy, Zuka being her more reserved yet well-intentioned friend, John and Jad poking jabs at each other. It's all done with love, and it feels realistic and really sweet, especially given the vibes of this part of the story. Everything going on with Ilahn is super serious, Sephie stuff is kind of playful but pretty serious, and this is way more emotional and relaxed and just feel good. I do have to say that I don't think I ever glommed on to the idea that this scene is initially presented like it's the wedding of Phoebe and Jad when you first read it. Going into this after years of having not read this book and reading Phoebe's dialogue again, Kessel's really clearly set this up to feel like Phoebe is preparing to get married. And yeah, she is preparing to get married like in the long term, but not today, right? Which I thought was just a great way to create some tension in the scene and throw a curveball at the audience. Obviously, I want childhood sweethearts Sephie and Jad to get married so Phoebe can hit the curb, and I'm sorry to say it, Phoebes, I'm sure you're great. You're just not Sephie. But it also makes complete sense for John and Mira to get married, both for their own personal reasons. After all, they ain't getting any younger. And like John said, it is a good way to bring some peace to the Meridian Knights in such an unfamiliar locale. I do think that it's a little silly that Zuka is the one warning Phoebe about rushing into marriage when Isago just left Ring City in order to be with her. But whatever, the heart is a fickle mistress and all that, and I guess love conquers all at the end of the day. I hate to say it, but I do think that some of the art here in this particular scene feels like some of the weakest that I've seen of McNiven's up to this point. Ugh, I don't like saying that. The shot when John and Mira are holding hands, exchanging their vows, everybody in the background just looks disproportionately tall to me. Is it just me? It feels like McNiven put all of his focus into Ilahn and Sephie's scenes in this issue, and so this part just got the least amount of focus. And it's still pretty, it still works, it still tells the story perfectly fine. It just feels like if everything else is like up here, this is like down here, right? As this scene wraps up, Sephie's narration kicks in over it. Thinking about Meridian no longer left Sephie feeling sad or empty. She could remember the good times and her friends without crying. After all, she had made so many new friends in the logging camp. They had given up their work to join her openly, and she thought that Darren did too. So she welcomed her friendship. Back down in the caverns, Darren now takes Sephie to her lair. The space is large, with wooden columns holding up the stone ceiling. A massive stone fireplace roars off to one side. There are broken bottles, shattered wood, and unconscious bodies all over the place. It really feels like Darren's lair is meant to be a bar or a tavern, some kind of gathering place for everybody. It's hard to read in this scene because you get one good shot anyways, of the space, but yeah. As the ladies move through the space, they pick up chairs with hands or, in Sephie's case, with sigil-based telekinetic force. What Sephie is planning to do, Darren says, challenge Ilahn's control? That is rough. But Darren has met other people who hoped to change the world before, and she wants to believe that they really can do it, but cleaning up after drunks and fights has really taught her otherwise. As they reach a wall, Darren shows Sephie a drawing hung upon it. It's of a little girl in a pink dress with long red hair tied in low ponytails. "Your mother drew this," Darren says. "It's me." Sephie is amazed to see a piece of her mother down here. "You knew my mother?" she asks. "I didn't know she ever came down to the caverns." Darren nods. "Yeah, many times. I remember her as a golden, big-bellied woman who made beautiful pictures appear. But she never came back after she had her baby. You. I hated you then for taking her away. Especially so after we heard that she had died. But I don't hate you now." Sephie earnestly thanks Darren for changing her mind. "You're the one who did it," Darren says, "with what you said to those people out there. You made me believe." "In what?" Sephie asks. "In you." "Sephie, don't hate me," Darren says. A hidden panel suddenly opens up behind Sephie, and from the darkness a pair of hands grab her. Sephie is yanked back, and the door slides back into place. "They need you," Darren says. "We need you." Sephie's narration ends the issue with one last thought. Sometimes I'm too trusting. Remember how Kessel had Sephie just walk into the loggers' camp carefully? How she considered her powers and her actions and how she would be perceived? How she learned from the experience in Acacia, right? Well, the warm welcome that she received in the loggers' camp undid the good that she had gained from that lesson. Rather than walk into the caverns and gauge this situation carefully, Sephie trusted her powers, her friends, and yes, she did trust Darren. She trusted her honestly because she wanted to. Kotzen and the other loggers had done nothing but tell Sephie how cool Darren was and how important she would be to winning over the caverns. Sephie needs to have Darren on her side, and then she let that blind her here. Kessel used the story with the loggers in order to lure Sephie and us into a place of complacency. Except for when the shadowy figure was like, "Is she the one?" we really had no reason to suspect that Darren was up to any kind of shenanigans. That is some solid plotting, and I love that kind of stuff. We walk into this issue expecting Sephie to basically repeat she did with the loggers and win them over, and she does do all of that stuff, but instead of getting trustworthy folks like Kotzen, Hundell, and Danian, we get Darren Beck. And she is up to something. I love the personal connection with Sephie here as well. The idea that Sephie's parents went on adventures and did things before her time, and that she can now connect with those events despite their absence, is just so utterly sweet and beautiful. It's also a cool way of further establishing the history of Demetria, which makes the world feel more real to us as an audience. The caverns have a history to them, we just have to find it. Turos and Idaria went on journeys and adventures. We just haven't seen them yet. As we move forward into our next couple of episodes, the connections between the past and the present and the goals they have for the future will become a forefront theme of Meridian. This first year of the book has really built Sephie and Ilahn into fascinating, complex characters. They both have solid motivations, we know who they are and what they want, and now we know they're both at work in trying to make those things happen. We have clear-cut goals for them. Ilahn wants to dominate the planet, and Sephie wants to make sure that he doesn't, and in doing so, she will free and claim Meridian. It has been a slow build to get here for sure, but Kessel has kept us guessing along the way. She has built an interesting and complex world and populated it with a variety of interesting people. When you can do a whole segment of this book dealing with background characters like the wedding of John and Mira, that's really impressive to me. Now that we've done all that, though, why not take a moment to look at what came before? Next week, I goofed. I thought that CrossGen Chronicles issue 3 would go here after issue 12, and then it would lead us into issue 13. But reading through those two issues now, that is not the case. I misremembered. I am actually going to cover episode 13 first, which will then set up the Chronicles issue, which will be a standalone episode. That will give us a bit of a cliffhanger for Ilahn's story, sure, but that's okay. I'll remind you all what's going on. You know that I like to do a nice summary. So next week, we'll meet Sephie's kidnappers and learn their hidden connection to Turos and Idaria of Meridian. Ilahn, meanwhile, finally succeeds in one of his latest goals. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 32.11 of Meridian, Secrets of the Hidden City. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.